So, what's the deal with PWHL expansion? Rumors have been aflutter, and we are definitely past that 4 to 6 weeks. Let's talk about it on today's episode.
This is the Women's Hockey Report presented by Locked On NHL. Your weekly look at the world of women's hockey. From the PWHL to the international stage, it's the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, WoHo fans. Welcome to another episode of the Women's Hockey Report, brought to you by the Locked On NHL channel, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team or your favorite kind of niche genre of hockey every week. Rachel Donner here. I'm Ayala, I should say. I'm alongside Rachel Donner. And today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers at FanDuel can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And we can talk about some of the ways that you might want to use your FanDuel buckaroos there. But Rachel, first, let's do the vibe check. How you feeling?
I'm kind of sad. We're in the PWHL break right now for Women's Worlds. Very excited about Women's Worlds. We're going to talk about that later in the show. But things were getting to a very critical point, and now I feel like it's been taken away from me. So I'm a little sad about that.
You know what? I definitely leaned into the excitement of Worlds of it all for our vibe check. And now that you mention it, and we are definitely going to break things down, I feel like we've kind of outed ourselves, right, as like low-key, maybe not so low-key Ottawa fans.
Maybe.
So the fact that there's the charge is having a little bit of a moment, yeah, that does make me a little sad. And I'm super excited for Worlds.
Totally.
But first, I didn't even want to put this in the vibe check because I'm still trying to figure out my vibe, I think, Rachel, when it comes to expansion news. Now, we've been hearing murmurs that there was going to be expansion. Let me backtrack. We have talked about on the podcast that Amy Shearer from the PWHL had given us a timeline of when an announcement about expansion would be announced. That was 4 to 6 weeks. I think we're at about 6 to 8 weeks now, Rachel, and we still haven't heard anything official about expansion. But since our last podcast, Rachel, everything from we've heard that a press conference is scheduled to now that has been canceled. Like, there's been a lot of news or a lot of buzz. I don't want to say rumors, maybe reporting, somewhere between rumors and reporting. There's been a lot of that in the last handful of days, but still no official announcement about expansion.
Yeah, it's really frustrating in a lot of ways because, again, we have this multi-week break here for Women's Worlds, and for the PWHL to get ahead of that conversation and stay a crucial part of that conversation, the timing of the expansion news is extremely important. Because I don't know that you want to talk about it mid-tournament at all, right? Because the focus needs to be on the international squads, and those players are going to be, hyper focused on their games and their country's teams, and you kind of don't want to mess with that, right? Because the players are going to think about getting taken in expansion drafts during Worlds. Like, no, we do not want that, right?
We don't. I mean, it came to mind, so I'm just going to say it. We women's hockey fans know that very critical news about women's hockey has broken right before Women's Worlds in the past. I'm sorry to bring it back to the dark days. If you know, you know, but we've been there before, Rachel. So that's an excellent point. And I mean, would we be shocked? Would we be surprised? And also, we said this before we came on air, but worth noting that we're talking at the time of this recording, we don't have an announcement. By the time you watch this, could things have changed?
Could be.
It's possible. It's very possible.
Yeah. And, as part of the chasm between rumors and reporting that you were talking about, there were definitely some cities that have been named. And I think some of them are interesting when you compare them to the takeover tour attendance that we
Mhm.
saw, because ostensibly, again, according to the league, the success of a particular takeover tour stop will have an impact on the decision-making process for
Yes.
expansion.
Yes, indeed. And so, I mean, I am the host of Locked On Kraken, so you know where I'm going first. Seattle has definitely been a part of the murmurs, the rumors, the reports, the cancellations, all of the things. In fact, Seattle, when we refer to press conferences, again, there have been people who've reported that a press conference in Seattle was scheduled and then it was canceled. I've been doing some recon, and I think what I'm comfortable saying is that there is a feeling and sentiment among people in Seattle that there will soon be an expansion announcement, that Seattle is at least in the running. And I'm getting vibes that it's very much we will know and believe it when we see it and hear it, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And it is obviously a very complicated process for the league. And, I'm sure it's a difficult decision to make. And there's a lot of good markets out there. It's like a good problem to have for the league,
Right.
to be honest. And, if you're looking at the takeover tour attendance
Mhm.
over the last 2 seasons and what might qualify a city, you have to look at Seattle because they're in the top 10 right there. So
Definitely.
they're like the 7th highest attendance
Yeah.
overall.
I mean, I was a little surprised that they weren't higher. It was interesting though, because I was at that takeover tour. You and I, of course, were both in Raleigh, but I want to just provide a little bit of context. There was apparently a Seahawks game that night. I don't follow the men's American football, but there is a Seahawks game. I believe it was like I don't know if it must have been a holiday or something to that effect, because it was like a Sunday or a Monday, something like that. So people in Seattle felt that those were actually good numbers, kind of considering what was happening on the Seattle sports calendar. We, though, have also seen really great numbers for Seattle when it comes to the attendance at the rivalry series, actually the highest attended rivalry series a couple of years ago. And then I
Yeah.
have to give a shout out to women's pro hockey, to Seattle. This has been a movement. They've changed names because, again, of the changing landscape of women's hockey, but there is a grassroots effort, whether it's coming from the Seattle Kraken. Again, I'm the host of the Locked On Kraken podcast. So between Jessica Campbell and a few other women that have been in the organization on the broadcast, in the front office, with Cami Granato, who has since moved on. There's just a lot of conversation around women in hockey and then thus girls in hockey. And there's a pipeline that's being built. There's a grassroots movement. I was a little surprised to see Seattle a little bit. I mean, yes, top 10, but there were 8 stops this year, or 8 or 9 stops this year. So being in the top 10 for me is like, oh, I thought they would have been a little higher, but that's why I wanted to add some context. I've always been, though, a proponent of getting some teams on the West Coast, even when
Right.
it was the NWHL or PHF. Like, I always thought that was great. You kind of have Minnesota out there doing their thing. I mean, Calgary also, whether we're talking again, we've seen Calgary in a few different iterations of women's pro hockey and also kind of out there on their own. So although Seattle, if we look at the attendance numbers alone, maybe doesn't pop. Also worth noting, Amy Shearer told us that there, and has said this multiple times, that there are other things, including how the PWHL was not only treated, but also treated by, I should say, the host, which more often than not has been an NHL arena, but also how they are received by the community and where they slot into the sports calendar and where they could effectively play. But another Western city, there's actually, I mean, the Western Canada. I mean, hello, British Columbia is ready for women's hockey. Can we just talk about it, Rachel? When we talk about
Yeah.
some of the top attendance numbers, just looking at attendance, what are we seeing from the takeover tours?
Right. And that's where Seattle makes sense in the bigger picture of things, right? Because you can pair it with a city like Vancouver or Edmonton
Mhm.
in Alberta, but still west. And so I think geographically, just having a couple of teams out west is good for the footprint of the league overall. And so I think Vancouver or Edmonton would make good locations for it. I think that again, it adds one team in the US and one team in Canada. Like
Yeah.
there's some parity to that. And at the attendance rates for the PWHL takeover events, Vancouver had the highest, over 19,000. Edmonton was the third highest with 17,500. Unfortunately, Quebec City in the middle is in the east. So, and that's where I feel like a city like Quebec City or Detroit, which is a huge, huge contender, and I would put a
Mhm.
team there tomorrow if we could.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking long term, if you're thinking big picture, Detroit can wait a year, right? If you bring in another Midwest or upper Midwest kind of team, like a Chicago or a St. Louis that we had on
Mhm.
the takeover tour, right?
Yep, final
You
stop.
bring those kind of two teams in together, makes it a little bit more understandable in terms of the long term planning.
Yeah. And then finally, as we move on here, I mean, you talked about Vancouver, Quebec City. I will say, Rachel, I think when we look at Raleigh, Pittsburgh, and Buffalo, maybe not so much St. Louis, but these are the stops with less than 10,000 in attendance. I do think that, well, and Pittsburgh again, not, or Pittsburgh, I will mention, was not this year, but the previous year. I don't know that all of the PWHL takeover tour stops felt to me like they got the same buzz and hype going in as some of the other cities. I mean, Buffalo is kind of one of them. I think Raleigh, we were super excited about Raleigh because we knew we were going. And I just feel like Buffalo, Raleigh, didn't, I don't know. I don't know if they got the love and attention that maybe some of the other cities did.
I think so, but I think there's like dipping your toe into certain markets
That's fair.
versus going back to more established markets.
That's fair.
So I think there's a difference there. And for first looks at some of these cities, I think they did a good job.
Yeah, overall, every city had over 8,000 in attendance. And we did see a lot of crossover between the PWHL and not just the NHL teams and the NHL market in the area, but with some other pro leagues as well, which I think again the PWHL, we know, Rachel, is really trying to take and catapult women's hockey to the next level. We talked about that a little with El Harchi, who's on the show, and then also with Lee Steckline, who joined us on the last episode with regard to kind of where women's hockey stands. We with Lee, we talked about specifically in the women's sports kind of landscape, and I think what we're seeing from the PWHL is that they are trying to also break through, and like, like crossover, go mainstream. If we're talking like it's an album, right? An album drop or something. They're trying to go crossover and go mainstream, go platinum in all of sports and not just in women's sports. I do think there's a delicate balance, though, of focusing too much on the overall sports landscape and not enough in the women's sports landscape. So again, think that's a little bit of a delicate balance, which quite honestly, I don't think hockey has always gotten right. But we'll see.
Yeah. To be continued.
To be continued. But we know that we have some amazing cities in the PWHL in women's pro hockey now, and they definitely put on a performance in the final week, as Rachel, you have already mentioned, leading into Women's World Championships that will be in Czechia. So, coming up, we are going to break it all down. What happened last week and why was Ottawa so charged up? Haha! We'll get into it coming up on today's episode.
Spring is officially here again, and with that extra daylight, I am doing a lot more. And the extra sunshine means there's more time for fun, but sometimes you need a little boost to power through, and 5 Hour Energy has your back. Whether you're staying up late watching PWHL games or getting up early for women's worlds that are in Czechia, or just trying to keep up with your busy day. 5 Hour Energy will give you that quick, refreshing pick me up whenever you need it. With these longer days, I love getting outside for a hike or a long walk. Tropical Burst is my go to flavor for a quick boost. And whether I'm at a game or traveling, 5 Hour Energy is easy to grab and keeps me feeling refreshed. So head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door. Need one now? You can grab a 5 Hour Energy shot at your local grocery store or convenience store. They are everywhere. So stock up today and stay energized.
All right. Welcome back to the Women's Hockey Report. Erica L. Ayala alongside Rachel Donner. And, Rachel, we talked about last week that a reckoning seemed to be on its way for Ottawa, maybe had already arrived, and that the team really needed to focus on getting back to winning ways with consistency because their coach's job might be on the line. Ottawa definitely found their groove in this past week. And we know that they needed that to the tune of them now being in the top 4 in the standings, Rachel.
Yeah, and it's been a very good week for Ottawa. I think that we talked about it last week that it was very mission critical with 2 big games against Boston ahead of them, and that it was going to be really important for them to win both. They were one of a couple of teams with 2 games and a chance to move up in the standings, and they did. So they beat Boston in a combined score of 6-1 over the 2 games. First time all season that Boston had been shut out, by the way, which is a huge accomplishment for Ottawa. And I think there are 2 main factors at play here. They were getting scoring from places they'd expect and places they wouldn't expect. And I think that's what you need in order to make the playoffs and then go into the playoffs with momentum. So one of the games, Cheyenne Darkangelo got a hat trick, which we love, love, love to
Shy
see
Dark. I'm
from
team Shy
her.
Dark all
I
the way.
know, veteran player, was in the first year of the NWHL, lo these many years ago now, and to see her continue to produce is just a blessing for all of us. But Teresa Vinisheva, 2 goals on Saturday as well, and so you would expect that from her to step up in a situation like this, and she did. So we're getting scoring from different places. Then we're getting good goaltending, right? So Gwyneth Phillips stopped 44 of 45 shots combined between those 2 games, right? And one of them was in St. Louis on the takeover tour, by the way, the last stop of the takeover tour. So it wasn't even like it was on home ice. This is like an unfamiliar environment. And then she was a perfect 17 for 17 in Boston. So absolutely clutch performance.
Absolutely. Gwyneth Phillips, always, as we know from the Raleigh stop, going to give the flowers and the stick taps to her teammates, and talked about Aneta Terralova, who had 3 block shots in the slot alone, and talked about in that Boston game, just making her life as easy as possible. And then, of course, talked about Shy Dark with the hat trick and saying, yeah, that makes the job easier too. The game for Cheyenne Darkangelo, she's talking about being able to play in a familiar building. They were in Lowell, Mass, but that this was a huge win going into the international break. Exactly what we needed is what we heard from Cheyenne Darkangelo. And I felt that we needed to be in like a must-win situation for Ottawa, for so many reasons, not just the playoffs, but as we mentioned,
right,
this could be troubling times for Carla McLeod if things didn't turn around.
Yeah, I mean, she was definitely on the hot seat. We talked about it last week, and now she's kind of turned her attention to Team Czechia for Women's Worlds to some degree, but going out on 2 solid wins against the Boston Fleet it is a really good way to head into the break for her and for the team.
And so with the standings, we talked about where Ottawa is, but as a recap, we know that Montreal still the only team, Rachel, who has clinched a playoff berth officially. So like things are so close. between third and fourth. But then Ottawa, only 1 point, Rachel, ahead of Minnesota, who then is ahead of New York. New York didn't have a terrible week,
No, they had a
and
great week,
yeah,
shutting
and
out Montreal
I
1-0.
know, exactly. It's just like, they're not officially eliminated yet. The standings are relatively close. They have a lot of work to do. And again, we're on an international break. We saw a Michigan goal. Like there's a lot going on, right? That being said, what are your takeaways, Rachel, for Minnesota? Because if the season were to end at this international break, it doesn't. But if it were, they'd be on the outside looking in.
Yeah, that's the thing about Minnesota is it's very clear they are not going anywhere and they are not giving up. And they have the scoring to do it, right? So they won 5-2 over Toronto to try and stay in that playoff spot, but it was just a numbers game in terms of Ottawa having 2 games to leapfrog them, right? But Minnesota leads the league in goals with 74 right now, and the issue has been they're giving up goals too. So they've let in 73. They only have a +1 goal differential on the season right now. And as we've said, their power play is just okay. Like their power play should be better for the skilled players that they have, but it isn't. And they did score 5 at 5-on-5 in this last game, but none of them were on the power play. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but also like if you want that extra advantage that's going to keep you in that playoff position, you got to be able to execute on the power play too.
Yeah, and this is why the conversations that we've had really all season long, they're starting to, really play out. We talked about how even though at a time, right, Minnesota's at the top of the table, and we were like, but have we seen their best game? Do they have habits that are going to keep them there? And I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about, that right now they're getting the productivity that they need, but it's not enough to erase some of the times where they fell a little bit short.
Yep.
So that's kind of what we're seeing here. And that also, I think, is indicative of why we see things so tight, and getting those games and those wins for Ottawa, just to go back to them, huge. But to your point, I mean, they have games in hand. We've talked about that. And they had 2 games this past week. And that's not going to happen for them the rest of the way out. So
No,
there's a
because
lot of continuity.
everybody's got 3 games left.
Exactly.
Like, so there's no like gaining an advantage here.
Nope. You have to play it out, cross the finish line, empty the tank, all of the things. So it's going to be fun. I mean, I'm with you. You mentioned it at the top of the show. Like, this is a wild time. Like, we want answers, right? We want to know who's going to be in the playoffs. But we have to wait. We have to wait because we have world championships smack dab in the middle of a PWHL playoff race. There's definitely a conversation at some time, probably the off season, where we will get into our thoughts and feelings about that overall when it comes to the women's hockey schedule. But for now, I mean, yeah, we've alluded to it a few times, but we're going to have to like really break this down. The dissertation, the thesis will be coming, folks. But for now, like I said, I'm choosing to lean into the happiness of Women's Worlds and Team Czechia hosting. We'll talk about that coming up on today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report. Today's episode of the Women's Hockey Report, as we mentioned at the top of the show, also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. And hey, listen, we've been talking about the madness happening in early April for women's hockey, but March Madness is still a carryover if you are a college basketball fan. And FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on that action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Let's say when, because I believe in you. I believe in you. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories. Not really a thing in either the women's or men's tournament, but you can still put in for who will cut down the nets. And listen, I feel like if you're looking at women's basketball, I've been saying this for a while, but the champion for this season will either be UCLA or UConn. And what do you know? They go head to head, I should say. And we will see if my prediction was right, because by the time you see this, we'll actually already know who won. So visit fanduel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, Rachel, we get to talk about women's worlds, and this is a fantastic tournament. We heard Lee Steckline on the show talk about her experiences at the international stage, and even though there is no more Four Nations, at least for now, in women's hockey, this is the event on the calendar every year that players who get to compete for their national team, for their federation, that they have circled. And like a lot of things, we see things heavy at the top. And Rachel, for the last, I don't know, what do we want to say, 3 to 5 years, we've seen, even though Canada and the United States are more often than not still in that 1-2, although we have seen Canada and the US slip into 3, we've seen movement in who that third team, 3, 4, 5 can be. And the host nation is a team that I've been keeping my eye on, Team Czechia, because I really think they can play some Wreck-It Ralph when it comes to how we think about the international stage for women's hockey.
Yeah, and as we talked about, Carla McLeod, who coaches Ottawa in the PWHL, is their head coach. There are many PWHL players on that team this time around, including Teresa Vanisheva, who we've already mentioned as part of Ottawa. There are 3 Ottawa Charged players on that team. And I think, when you're looking at kind of the quality of play from these other countries that are not USA, Canada, to have this many top tier league players on your national team, I think it just bodes well, because it's not just that they're individually good players, but now they have a lot of solid experience playing against the top competition in the world in the PWHL, and that will only elevate Czechia's game.
Absolutely. 9 overall, including, for those who are keeping up with Montreal, you know that Dominika Lashkova has returned. She had a very, a very difficult recovery and injury, and is back now, named to the Czechia national team. If you were a Toronto Six fan, you should definitely know that name, because Lashkova and Vanishova, of course, were on that team that was able to win the last ever Isabel Cup, and Lashkova and Vanisheva both scored in that game. Vanisheva had the game-winning goal. And, so I'm super excited. There's also a few other players that are not in the PWHL, or at least maybe not yet, Rachel. We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
That we have to talk about when it comes to Team Czechia. They are the hosts, and if you are following PWHL reports and reporters and outlets and listening to the podcast, then you have to imagine that we'll talk a lot about some of these players. But I want to move on, because it's not just Czechia. Of course, we've talked about the United States roster. We are going to talk again about the Hockey Canada roster, but let's also talk about some of the other players that will represent their national teams that are familiar to people following the PWHL.
Yeah, so we have several players from other countries, including 3 from Sweden, including goaltender Emma Soderberg, who plays for the Fleet, backs up Erin Frankel there. She actually got some playing time, because Frankel got pulled in a game, which had not happened this season at all. So Soderberg came in there. And of course, Finland, Susanna Tapani is a mainstay in the women's hockey world, and also on the Boston Fleet. Nora Toulouche of the New York Sirens, and Ronja Savalainen of the Ottawa Charge. Again, part of the massive Ottawa Charge presence at this tournament here. But I do think, like, when you're looking at Sweden, Finland, Czechia as that next tier, could some other countries steal some games? Yes, because Sandra Abstreiter, goaltender of Montreal, is in net for Germany, and she's phenomenal.
So
Alina Mueller who's been a one-woman wrecking machine for Switzerland over the years, is back. Of course, she's a member of the Boston Fleet.
I think that I cannot wait to see how this plays out. We also haven't mentioned Japan, Hungary, Norway. Those teams will also be in the field. They just don't have representation at the moment in the PWHL, but not that we haven't seen pro players from those countries in women's hockey leagues prior. So, we have to point that out for sure. And I think that, we have the group A and group B. So Germany, Sweden, Japan, Hungary, and Norway. And then Canada, USA, Finland, Czechia, Switzerland. But Rachel, you wonder if maybe we should rename the groups, and what's your thought process there? What do you think is missing from how the IHF breaks down these groups?
Well, if you look at the men's side, they have more of an equitable division between the different groups. And what they do on the women's side is have the top teams in one group and the lower tier teams. This is all of the top tier of countries, but
Yes.
the upper teams in one group and the lower teams in another group. And there's pros and cons to it for sure. I think in terms of, making it so that the lower tier teams actually have some more competitive games and get to experience wins more often, given how top heavy the women's game has been, certainly understandable. But are we reaching a point where we need to start mixing it up a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. The downside again to it is that level of competition, and you don't get a Canada USA game in the prelims. So that's
Yeah.
something that the tournament wants. So I see both sides of it for sure.
I'm with you. I think there are a lot of different ways to look at this argument. I think for now, and if we think in the way that not, super fans like us think about women's hockey, but people trying to make a case, or that think they still have to try and make a case for competitive, exciting, entertaining hockey that can be packaged for a broadcast. I mean, not like anyone but Canada, at least in North America, ever broadcast it. I want a national feed, people. Anyway, again, one of those things that we will put in the parking lot until the off season. But I think ultimately that what needs to happen is that these teams in Group B in particular, that they start to utilize the NCAA and now the PWHL as areas where they can improve their teams. Now, of course, that would require a few different let me put it this way. There's a few different ways that I'm thinking on how you can do that. Yes, you can have some of your players and encourage them to go through the NCAA, Rachel. We just talked, right, about Frozen 4. You can also encourage them to try to make a PWHL team. But we've also seen that in the past, teams have also created opportunities to play friendlies with women's pro teams. We've seen Russia do that. We've seen Japan do that. We saw China infuse an entire Canadian hockey league with funds so that they could add at the time 2 teams. So there's a lot of different ways that I'm thinking you can do that. And I think what that does is that it endears fans to some of the players they get to see. Hello, why am I a Team Czechia super fan? Because a lot of them went through the NCAA system. But I think also it gives you that barometer. And hopefully, you can make a case for your federation then to invest. But actually, the last thing that I said is probably the first thing that I should have said, Rachel, right? Because some of these federations, including the United States, let's just put it out there, do not have a great history of funding their national teams. We know that Sweden has gone through a lot, and they used to be a top tier team and have really struggled to find their way back. I think Japan is a team that they had such great goaltending for so long, and they're just starting to now get some skaters who can really score and at these international tournaments. So I think for me, I want to see the development change a little bit before I think we change the tournament structure overall.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
But we do know that Team Czechia will be hosting. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I remember when Finland hosted and there was a very dramatic finish in the gold medal game. I still feel bad for Finland. So what are we expecting from this host nation, Rachel? What are we expecting from the crowd? But also, what are we expecting from the competition?
Yeah, it is interesting. We've talked about them as a rising program. And, in addition to the PWHL players that we've already talked about, they have several younger players
Mhm.
on their squad. They're a very young team. And Linda Vochekova just turned 18. She was captain of their U18 team that won bronze. And,
Mhm.
I think that some of these younger players are going to breathe some new energy into this senior level team, especially given that last time around they came in fourth,
Mhm.
losing the bronze game. It was very heartbreaking. And I think that they are on a mission this year, and I would not be shocked to see them in that bronze medal game again and come out with a win this time around.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. In Raleigh, the day before the takeover tour, I and also Preston from the Czechia women's hockey report. So there's two that you got to make sure you're following now. We were able to talk to some of the players, and they really do feel that there's an opportunity here. You talk about the young talent and the atmosphere that they are expecting. I think that you're as prepared as you can be for it. I mean, there's obviously a lot of excitement. I think they feel a lot of that like good pressure, good stress about it. And, I'm not entirely sure they know exactly what to expect. So I'm super excited, but I think that this is just going to be a great moment for the growth of the Czech national team, the women's team. And I also think that how Czechia plays, we talked to Lee Steckline about physicality, right? This is going to be a tournament in Europe. Team Czechia, they have a definitive style. They definitely play a physical game. They're not necessarily a big, tall team, but they play physical. And I wonder if we see also as the team continues to invest, some of that finesse really come through in some of the younger players, really for all of the teams come through. But also, Rachel, I know you and I both love talking about goaltending. So before we close out today's episode, who are you keeping an eye on when it comes to goaltending? And then, of course, we will still give you what we think is our game of the week or in the first few days of the tournament. So, Rachel, first, let's talk goaltending.
Yeah, so the biggest question for me is for Team Canada,
Yep.
will Anne Renee Desbiens be good to go, right? And
Mhm.
if not, who's going to get the starts for this team? I think that is it, to me, the biggest question going into it. Again, Canada's had some roster changes already because Hannah Miller's not eligible anymore, despite being named for the team, which was a choice that they made to do. Julia Gosling will now play in her place, but
Mhm.
but I think it all kind of hinges on Anne Renee Desbiens, to be honest. And I think that's the biggest question. I think the secondary question is, will Aaron Frankel just get all the games for USA? Are they going to give anybody else the game? Who knows?
Yeah.
Um,
I think there's such a turning point here for Team USA. It certainly feels that way in net. We talked about Rooney a few times already. I don't know. I think that the trend seems to be, especially for the two North American teams, to kind of go with your ace throughout the
mhm.
tournament. And I think that makes for there's obviously benefits, right, to that. And I think that perhaps there are challenges that have come with that we're now seeing play out, including that do you even really know who your ace is over time if you're only giving
Right.
one player the
Right.
starts? And do you even know who could be your top, your second choice, your third choice? Could you even come up with a situational lineup if you're not giving these goaltenders starts? So I mean, I don't know. But Rachel, we have the first few games We know that things are going to start on Wednesday, April 9th, and we'll see Czechia in action, their first game as hosts. USA and Finland will be in action, and Sweden and Germany, I should say. Czechia is playing Switzerland. So that's just day one. But if we look at the first pack of games, Rachel, is there one that stands out for you?
Well, I mean, it's really the first 2 games for Finland that stands out
Mm.
for me because they're facing USA first and Canada second on consecutive days. Like,
Yeah.
that is a brutal way to start this tournament for them.
Yeah.
I think if they can survive that with some positive things to come out of it, then they might be in a good position moving forward.
Yeah, I'm with you. But I'm looking at Czechia's first game. They'll play Switzerland, as I just mentioned. I really want to know what the vibe, what the environment is like, and so hopefully we can talk to Preston about that a little bit. But then to your point about Finland, Czechia is going to see the United States in their second game, and I think that too will be huge for them. I think will be a good test of how prepared they truly are, not just to come into this tournament, but to come in as hosts. And that there is extra pride on the line and they want to put on a good show. So I think it's going to be exciting. You can check out IIHF for the full slot here. And of course, make sure you stay tuned on the Women's Hockey Report, part of the Locked On NHL channel, so you can find on YouTube or wherever you listen to audio podcasts. You actually have to look for the Locked On NHL show, but then look for our purple and black logo. That's how you know it's the Women's Hockey Report. And also we have a TikTok channel, an account that we are curating for you, and we'll definitely lean into that when it comes to World Championships, because like I said, talk to a lot of the Czechia players about Worlds. We had Lee Steckline there, so make sure you follow the Women's Hockey Report on TikTok for more information. For Rachel Donner, I am Erica L. Ayala. Hey, it's going to be an exciting week of women's hockey. We'll just have to wait, though, to see who makes it through to the PWHL playoffs. But either way, we will have you covered right here on the Women's Hockey Report. Until next week, thanks everybody for tuning in. Make sure you are following, leave us a review, all of the good things, and we will catch you on the next episode of the Women's Hockey Report.